we're going to crack straight into it. Could you just provide us sort of a bit of context sort of around what has been sort of widely publicised, of Adidas's sort of situation?
Very leading question to start with.
Yeah.
So I think we actually had two very positive things happen within the business over the last 5 or 6 years. The first was that we really repositioned away from media being a cost centre, and we moved it towards being an investment. And the second was that we started selling more direct to consumers via our own e-commerce website, both incredibly good things. I think one of the unforeseen consequences of both of those factors, though, was that it led us to be a little bit more short-termist, because when you view media as an investment, you have to make a business case for it. And I think, as I say, that's a good thing. But it's far easier to make a clear business case for the next quarter, the next 6 months, and it's far easier to prove out those results than prove out some of the results that Les and Carl were talking about earlier, which take place over years rather than months. And also, because we were selling much more direct to the consumer, we had a lot more data. And there's a temptation there, even though that's a very rich resource, there's a temptation there, because you can literally see sales happening moment by moment, there's a temptation to optimise and optimise and optimise. And while that's good to a certain degree, it can lead you to not focus quite so much on some of the long-term things that we've talked about this morning and that are super important.
So I guess the strategy there is that you're looking at it going, well, we're going to a direct consumer model. It's online sales, so it makes sense to market in that domain. Yeah,
exactly. And don't get me wrong, like most of our sales still occur in third-party wholesalers.
Yeah.
But the model we had previously was we had very little visibility of that, because it was a third-party retailer rather than us doing it directly. As soon as it becomes a direct transaction, then there is a temptation, because, as I say, you can see those sales happening in the moment, to only look at that and forget about the bigger picture and the longer-term picture.
So I've got a slide here, right? It's a banana slide. I know people have seen this. It's actually in E.E. Green's book, which I'm shamelessly plugging a lot these days. This is pretty much, it builds on the how brands grow theory, and it just illustrates heavy users and light users. Like, do you generally in your organisation subscribe to this theory?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly at a brand like Adidas, you do get an admittedly small but incredibly vocal group of loyalists.
Yeah.
Like people that literally will know far more about Adidas than even I do working there. They spend a lot of money with us, but they're very small in the grand scheme of things. Most people will buy one thing from us a year.
Yeah.
Like that's what we see in the data. And it's very easy to forget about that group because they're quite quiet, but they're also absolutely massive. And in terms of commercial realities, that's where the actual numbers get generated.
Right, yeah. And the general theory is that heavy users don't grow your brand, lots of light users grow your brand. That's why we have this banana to illustrate this. And do you think the sort of modern measurement techniques that you referred to sort of reward the right-hand side of that graph, the heavy users, a little more so than the light users?
Yeah, because I think when you're investing with a more short-term outlook, then that is the group that's easiest to convert over a short time period. And because they're heavy buyers, because you probably have data about them already, they're the group, they're like the easiest win, like the lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah.
But going back to what I said, commercially, whilst they spend more on average, they're relatively small in terms of overall size, and therefore commercially not going to move the needle quite so much. Yeah, the temptation is to market to them, perhaps in a digital capacity, but they're going to execute anyway. So you're wasting your money in essence. And yeah, I think that goes back to like the whole incrementality discussion around, how much is media actually generating incremental sales rather than just cannibalizing stuff that would have happened anyway.
Can I just comment on how marvellously on brand you are today, by the way?
Yeah, I'm contractually obliged to do that.
Yeah. So all brands are different, but how do you differentiate between your, what do you call long and short term in your organisation?
So we launch a lot of product, and typically we will have that in stores for like 4 to 6 weeks. So our short term is that kind of window.
Yeah, long term?
Long term is anything beyond that, essentially. I think we've, going back to the work that Les showed this morning, I think over 6 months is what we're typically seeing, but essentially, like most of our short-term results come quite quickly.
Yeah.
And really, it's looking beyond that immediate campaign period to how strong the brand is growing beyond like that initial product launch.
Yeah. So, okay, that's interesting. So, according to this article I read, that you were using measurement metrics, or I'm going to say using the wrong measurement metrics. You can correct me on this, but you're using Google Last Click, Google Custom, Adobe, and Facebook. Can you essentially trust these companies who are there to sell you media to provide you with the measurement tools that you need to grow your brand?
Yeah, I think that there's an implicit assumption already when looking at attribution models that they're looking holistically at all the effects, and I think Carl just showed the classic iceberg, right? Like attribution is a small part of the picture, so even if it's done perfectly, even if it's perfectly trusted, you're looking at digital sales in one sales channel, and you're looking at digital advertising, even if it's done perfectly, even if it's perfectly trusted, and you're looking over necessarily the short term. Like most attribution models are 30 days or less. I think the maximum I've seen is 90 days, and the reality with consumer privacy and cookies and stuff like that is that that's going to shrink and get shorter and shorter in terms of what you can measure. So yeah, attribution is a small part of the picture. I think the question of whether you can trust it or not, it's a useful tool, but the bigger question is whether it's holistic enough to give you good enough feedback, particularly over the long term.
And you used econometric modelling, didn't you, to provide that holistic view?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the maybe not a silver bullet, but it's the one thing that has been one of the most impactful things internally in terms of showing long-term effectiveness of media.
Yeah.
Because going back to what I was saying, it's harder to make those business cases, and it's harder to actually show that long-term impact. But econometric modelling is certainly the primary way we're looking at that now.
Okay, so we've beaten him up enough about all the past and the bad stuff, but let's look at that. I'm really keen on when brands go down that route and they do invest in short, and how do you fix that? How do you actually, like, if Les and Peter are right, how do you actually repair that? So what are the things that Adidas are doing to correct this?
So I think the first thing is, everyone in this room has probably seen a lot of this material before, but in large, complex, multinational clients, we have a lot of people where media is part of their job, not all of their job, and they won't be familiar in detail with a lot of this material. So the first thing we did was really just look on a global basis, actually, and I can't take credit for this directly, but look at a kind of educational piece around getting some of the content, the stuff that Les was showing this morning, out into the wider business, so it was more understood how media actually worked and how brand building actually worked.
Didn't you buy a load of his books and send it around the world?
Yeah,
that's
classic.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds super simple, but but that sounds like a super simple thing to do, and it is. But nowadays, hardly anyone gives you a book. It's all like PDFs and going straight in your email trash. So like having a hard copy was quite simple. And then like the more important, well, maybe not more important, but another very important part was structurally looking at how we were organised. So previously in Europe, we had a team doing performance media for our e-commerce site, and a team in another part of the business doing brand media. And what that meant, as well as lots of problems around doing integrated campaigns and operationally, but what that meant is that when they were pitching in for budget, it became like a competition between those two teams. And
would they compete for money then?
Yeah.
So they'd use their metrics to prove, this works and that works.
Yeah, and the e-commerce team, quite rightly, could show more clearly the business case, because it was easier to measure, it was over the short term, and if you're in a position of allocating money, it's a clearer, easier story, like put this in and I'll give you this back. Whereas the branding teams are much longer term. But having those sat in different places kind of created that competition. So what we actually did is put both those teams together within Europe. So not only do we have like operational benefits in terms of being able to plan more holistically, but it takes away that kind of competitive budget situation, and you can actually make a case for how to plan both the long and the short.
Does that mean now when you do your performance stuff, you do your activation stuff, it actually feeds into the overall brand message?
Exactly.
It works better? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've done the learning, you've brought these departments together, and then agency.
Yeah, so we mirrored that in agency as well. So previously, again, because we had two separate teams, we had two separate agencies in Europe, and again, that creates competition. In a kind of unhealthy way potentially, because again, like the performance agency, and quite rightly, and I don't blame them for this at all, is pitching for more money, making that business case, and that competition is not necessarily healthy in terms of getting the balance right. So again, like consolidating into one agency has helped us a lot structurally in terms of making sure that we're properly balanced.
So you got it into one agency, but I also think you've changed the model as well, haven't you? Are they, the agency have got an outcomes-based performance model as well?
And I think that's important as well. So we have a long-term partnership with our media agency. So
that's interesting.
We don't like review it every 6 months, like some people do.
Race to the bottom.
Exactly. And we have a long-term partnership with them. Part of their remuneration is based on whether we hit our business results ourselves. So in terms of their incentives, they're more aligned with what we're trying to do as a brand now.
Is that sales, or is there like long-term branding KPIs that are built into that? Okay.
Both. Yeah, so it's the long and short. So again, just making sure that balance is right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm wondering though, is Adidas now going to return to some of the John Lewis stuff, the big campaign stuff? I racked my brains actually, embarrassingly, on a call, and I said to him, "You remember this campaign?" And Andy was like, "Yeah, that campaign." I was referring to Nike. But the one I did actually have a look because I used to love Predator football boots and stuff, and it was this stuff here. I don't know if people recall this ad. It was actually a really long ad, like David Beckham and Johnny Wilkinson. It was a brilliant piece of creative. Are you going back to that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a media guy rather than the creative guy, so let's see what happens. But certainly in terms of the objectives that we want to achieve with our campaigns, going forward, it's going to be much more balanced. And much more focused on that long-term brand building and brand health. And
what can TV do? It's a TV event. What can we do to as an industry to help support brands like Adidas to support the end goal of your performance and building brand?
So I think it's already been alluded to this morning, but TV's in a naturally quite strong position as the pendulum swings back more towards long-term brand building. So in a sense, like there's not a huge amount to do other than to make sure that the basics of TV are still there. I think one thing, there's been a lot of conversation around addressable TV and moving towards more of a one-to-one advertising model with the consumer, and that obviously has benefits. But I think examples like this, when you really land a brand, it relies on not only everybody seeing it, but everybody knowing that everyone else has seen it. Yeah. And that's something that broadcast and potentially outdoor are uniquely positioned to do. So I think whilst the focus on getting more clever with the technology and getting more targeted is certainly something that is very positive, I think it's important not to lose sight of the power that TV has as a real broadcast medium of a one message to everybody. I think that's important to keep in mind.
So people in your role around the world, you're all sitting there chatting, going, "Yeah, actually, this TV thing's pretty good." Is that your feeling, your sense?
Yeah, I think
there's a shift of opinion.
Yeah, and we have a younger audience than a lot of brands, and that's potentially less suited to TV than some. Mm-hmm. But certainly there's I think the feeling around TV is generally positive.
Okay, right, on campaign, can you just speak, you've got a new ad coming out, nice bit of creative. Can you just give us a bit of background on it before we show it to the audience?
Yeah, sure. So we've launched, I think a couple of days ago, we've launched a partnership with the International Space Station, because apparently it's just cool to put stuff in space now, and that's what all advertisers do.
That's what I heard.
But yeah, it's a nice piece of creative, but there's a couple of things I think that are in the context of this discussion that are quite interesting with it. Firstly, I was looking for like the best piece to put up, and we had lots of cut downs of this, but in my view, like the best version was the longest version, which we're going to show in a second. And I think that goes back to the strength of TV, because this film as we'll show it, is not really landable in a lot of the digital environments. Yes, we can build up a bit of frequency with 6-second, 10-second stuff. But as you'll see with the film, to really land an emotional message, I think it takes a long time to actually do that, and TV is positioned well in terms of that. And the second thing I'll say is that it's a long-form piece of content, but I think we're increasingly making sure that our campaigns are delivering over the long term and the short term as one campaign. So whilst this has a longer term brand building objective, underneath it sits a lot of product stories, a lot of activation-based stuff that will work in the short term, and having that integration both within teams structurally, but also within your agency has helped us a lot with that.
Well, that's awesome. Well, let's see the creative. I think if I press next, it might play. Here we go.
Pushing boundaries is at the heart of sport. It's what turns plays into history, turns human achievements into moments in culture. It's how the impossible becomes possible. How everyday people can inspire the world to change. When the stakes are this high, how far would you go? Would you find a running mate who makes the world wonder? Someone who has gone further than anyone else, but whose values are the same as yours? Would you push your best tech in the most extreme of environments, taking them all the way to space to see what you can learn about them in zero gravity? Would you push the limits of innovation? They say if you want to go quickly, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Adidas and the International Space Station National Lab. Well, just imagine how far we will go.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Andy for coming on stage and talking to Space Story today. Thank you.
Thank you, mate.
I appreciate that.